Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Ted Allen. I'm the host of Chopped on the Food Network, which, thank you, for which I have Mr. Dave Knoll of Notional to thank.
Thank yourself. Because mostly, I'd say 92% because of you.
What Dave doesn't realize is he could replace me instantaneously with somebody young and good-looking, and the ratings would double. But fortunately, I have an ironclad contract and a really mean agent. To my left, Chachi Senior, who is the president of Notional LA. Then we have Dave Knoll, president of Notional generally. Mr. Chris Grant, who is the CEO of Electus. Then we have Aki Yorihiro, who is the CEO of many things, among them Yashimoto Entertainment USA. And down on the end, we have Grant Ross, global head of format acquisitions at Endemol. It's a very smart panel, should be a lot of fun. And what we are here to talk about today is pushing paper around the world, which to me sounds illegal. Sounds like some kind of check-kiting scheme, but apparently it's something else. And to that end, I suppose we should turn to you, Dave, or you'd prefer we turn to Chachi, and talk about what exactly are we talking about here with pushing paper, selling ideas.
Selling ideas, that's what we're talking about here. It is, I'll go back to when Dave and I started out. When we first started attacking the global market, we were told often that you could not sell an idea off of paper. Meaning, you have an idea, you write it on a treatment, and you go out and you try to sell this idea. The global market is known for buying proven formats, meaning that they were already successful in a certain territory, a certain area of the world. And then him and I took it upon ourselves to sort of prove the industry wrong, and we started just selling paper. So
that sounds cooler than it was. Much more naive and stupid.
Yes, it was very, very dumb. But
it was much more like, well, we can't make tapes.
Yeah, we don't have the money to make tapes, so.
So the idea has to be so good that, but when we started, people did flat out say, what you're doing is impossible, it can't be done. And that seemed really odd to us because you think all these ideas have to start somewhere. Everything you've read, whether it's Survivor or Big Brother or Chopped or whatever, it all has to start with an idea somewhere. So someone's going to have to buy the paper, unless you happen to have, $1 million to make a pilot or $100,000 to make a pilot or whatever. There's different ways to do it, whether it's mood tapes or artwork and all that other things. But there has to be an idea that somebody believes in. That at least was our theory, right? So if other people have done it in the past, why can't we do it?
And you have, in fact, done it. You have sold. What paper have you successfully pushed?
We've done a lot in the U.S. on various cable networks. So Chopped at one point was just selling the paper to the Food Network and selling that format. But we've sold shows to Lifetime and MTV and HGTV and all these various networks off of paper. But then really where the bigger money is selling it, and this is where we can kind of get into discussion with you fine gentlemen, is selling it around the world, creating some sort of format. I read once, Fremantle describes it as creating some sort of format that you could realistically see 30 different versions of around the world. That's their number. Mm-hmm. A Russian version, a French version, a German version, a version in the US, etc. That's their target, and so that's kind of, I was like, oh, they're smart, let's do that. So that's one of our filters is, can you sell this show and realistically see it on 30 different territories around the world? Is there anything I've said that's incorrect so far, or you might add to or disagree with?
No.
That's the guy that buys our formats on the end over there. So we have to keep looking on that end.
But he's got no more money left.
So, all right, but to me, the first show I was in, Queer Eye, for the Straight Guy on Bravo, was sold.
Legendary
well,
show.
It was fun at times, other times not. The Queer Eye guys, Scout Productions, sold that show by printing a magazine. They didn't have a lot of budget to make a pilot right away until Bravo and NBC stepped in, and I'm sure bankrolled part of it. But they printed a magazine, which any of us can do on our Apple at home. So they at least gave some kind of visual identity to the show that way. Do you not?
That was very instrumental in what we did early on, because I worked at VH1 and had a good friend who worked at Scout, and so Scout.
Yeah.
And I saw that magazine, That's, again, that kind of helped in the naivete of, well, if Scout could do it and print this magazine that's so beautiful and impress the folks at Bravo, why can't we do the same thing?
I started, Reveille's distribution business, and we started basically with, paper formats and taking them overseas, and for us it was always about how do you make the game, or how do you make the show accessible and exciting to the international buyers while also keeping your costs down, not necessarily doing tape. I remember we did a game show called Identity, which only did I think it aired 12 times on NBC in prime time. I think it may still even be on the air in Italy. I switched jobs, so no longer does that.
You don't know that.
It doesn't matter to me anymore. But what we did was we simply actually set up the game. We would play the game with the buyers, and that really helped create the buzz. And it was all about sort of creating the buzz on another show we had. And it's all about trying to, on every different idea, and I think you skin the cat differently each different time. It's looking at the idea and saying, okay, what's the best way in? What's the best way that we're going to tackle this? What's the best way that we're going to change this up? So, for example, we years ago we looked at a busted pilot that Howard Schultz brought us, and Howard was the creator of Next and created Extreme Makeover, and he brought us a busted pilot of an NBC show called it was called at that point Nothing But the Truth, and we looked at it and we're like, this is fantastic. And we took it to that tape, that sizzle. We made a sizzle based off that pilot, and took it to the market and cut it down into, cut the pilot down into a sizzle reel, and it became, an international sensation. We sold it into sort of 23 countries around the world. It made it into, the show ended up becoming The Moment of Truth, which was on Fox for sort of several seasons, and it made it to Fox because there was.
So it started on NBC.
It started on NBC. It never went on the air on NBC. Never went on the air on NBC. They passed on the pilot. The rights reverted. The format rights reverted. We took that tape. We used the tape sort of to tease the audience around the globe. And the nature of the show, I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, is that you basically get someone, you hook them up to a lie detector machine, and in front of their family you ask them tons of questions which they probably wouldn't want to answer. And in our Colombian version, we had a woman actually admit to hiring a hitman to kill her husband.
That's gold.
And it made it into an article in the New York Times. And then we showed that it was shown to Mike Jarnell at Fox, and he immediately ordered, straight to series. and the show became a huge hit. So I think that there's, the different nuances in terms of this is talking about pushing paper around the world, but it's, you do need to do things to sort of make the paper, to make the sort of paper rise above, to make it, to differentiate it.
Yeah, like you're saying, there's many ways to skin a cat, isn't there? And every idea, or every paper format as we call it, is different and unique in its own. And one of the challenges is trying to get your vision of that idea across the table to whoever the buyer is on the other side, whether it be a distributor or a channel or a production company. And every idea needs to be treated differently. And like you were saying, Identity, I remember that pitch precisely, and it was a fantastic pitch. The game show Beale, trying to guess what these different people do. And lining up all these different people, and you played this game, and it got me hooked. All of a sudden, there's just cards down there with photos on them, and Chris would turn around and say, well, which one do you think is the fireman? And all of a sudden, I'm into the game, and I'm playing the game. And 20 minutes later, I'm still playing the game. Very simple way of pitching an idea, very effective. And then other ideas, of course, you may need to have a bit of sizzle tape or a mood tape on it. It all depends on what your idea is.
Well, is there a danger if you go in with I understand that as a game show you can play the game with your audience, and if it's fun, it's fun. But what about wanting to establish some kind of a visual identity and brand? If you don't do that, if you haven't done that, are there not problems? Are there not?
I don't think of it as establishing a brand so then every territory has to follow that first. I think about it kind of the way you all have been talking, which is if we're taking something out, like this week we're taking out a show called You versus America for the first time, or last NATPE we had a show called Love Song that we were taking out. What we're sitting around and thinking about is whether it's through artwork or a mood tape or whatever, is how can you create a pitch? So not only does the show have to be good, right? And the show has to be something that these buyers have never seen before, and I'm sure Grant Ross, you've seen thousands of formats at this point, so to impress this guy is incredibly hard. So not only does the show have to be good, but the pitch itself has to be memorable in some way. And so whether we're doing, and it
has to be clean and translatable in several languages, because you're pitching people that are from all over the world.
So the artwork to me is I think it's cool because if you have it and it's on this big paper, there's the unrolling of it, which is what we've done in the past, where just that moment of unrolling gets the person on the other side of the table to go, oh, there's a lot of work that's been done here. Someone has hand-drawn this. And I really start to see the show as the person who's taking the pitch. But I think the best example recently of just doing anything to get a show sold was last year at NATPE. We have pitching a show called Love Song, and he brought his ukulele because it's a half dating, half performance show, and it just so happens that you can play the ukulele and have just a gorgeous velvety voice, and so we told the story of the show, and then
we told the story of where the show came from, and then we just
under the table he picks up this ukulele and starts singing because the show is all about serenading. This perspective.
It's a dating singing show.
Wooing / serenading this prospective date. And so if you're thinking at that moment, what we're really doing is just wooing a prospective buyer, right? It's the same thing. And so he pulls out his ukulele and starts serenading. And the way we sold it to Oxygen was we wrote a song for
unannounced
Corey Abraham at Oxygen. And so in the middle of the pitch, just brought it out and sang our song. That only works if you know the buyer very well. And
I did that to get...
And if she's as gorgeous as Corey Abraham is.
Or as Chachi is.
Corey in the room?
No.
Unannounced.
I actually wrote and recorded a song to get a job at a newspaper once, which was spectacularly stupid, but memorable. Are there other techniques to get a job?
What's the weirdest of everything you've ever seen or heard? What is the weirdest? Is it the ukulele or...
I don't think it's about what's the worst. I think it's about, you've got to keep in mind that what we look for is not an idea. An idea, we can all have an idea, even I can have an idea. What we're looking for is, is much more than an idea. I think you've got to know what your show is about. I was saying a little bit earlier this morning, what is a format for a start? You've got to know that it is, it's distinctive and characteristic features, and it's a combination of these elements, whether it be framework or running order or concepts or rules or anything like that. It's a combination of these that make up a format. So if you take something like, we're all familiar with a Big Brother, the idea is to throw 15 kids or 15 people into a house and film them. That's only an idea. It's what happens within the structure of every episode that makes it a television format. So I think, when you're pitching these paper formats, and like you said, they've got to start from somewhere. If it's a docu-soap, well, you're going to have a taste of the casting, aren't you? The idea is going to be follow these people, so to speak, if I do it very simple. But what you're going to sell is the talent in that show. So once again, very important that you think about what you're talking about and develop it to a certain extent. And make sure that you can get that vision across of how you see your show.
And then the tough part is, and then on top of that, you have to make sure that your pitch is, so if you're at a conference like this and you're pitching to a network in France, it's very different from pitching just weird basic things. Like we started off and we would have treatments with an act-by-act breakdown. And then what we quickly realized is different networks have different number of acts. So you'd have these weird conversations where they would say, well, we don't have 6 acts, we only have 5. Or in France, sometimes it's just 42 straight minutes, and then there is no act break. And so then you're in the awkward, awful position of like saying silly things like, well, oh yeah, well, of course, we don't really need commercials and blah, 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 blah. So what we started doing was we stopped calling it act by act and we started calling it a beat by beat. And so now we have all the beats of the show, and that literally solved the problem overnight. We just stopped calling it acts and didn't get tripped up. But you need that beat by beat so people can look at that and say, oh, it's not just an idea, it's not just a tagline. The tagline gets you there to that second page or the third page, but you need that beat by beat to say there is a format, and we have been thinking about it for months and months and planning it out and playing this game over and over again to get to the rules.
Sure, and know your client. Know who you're pitching to. You know, what do you want to do with this show? Are you taking it to a broadcaster? Well, you've got to know whether it's going to fit into their schedule or not. There's no point pitching, a format about animals to, a broadcaster that doesn't ever do animals. Know your client, know what they want, know your territory if it is overseas. Sometimes you're better off partnering with a production company that can help you develop it, maybe bring credibility to the production if you're not a producer yourself. Or a distributor who can go out and see if there's any takers around the world, because a distributor is well connected with many territories and great producers around the world. All different ways of going about it. Yeah. What about the Japanese model in particular?
Well, we kind of have a hybrid model, I guess. We've created 2 shows with Notional, and last year we created a show with Chris last year. I think where we kind of we're sort of like a hybrid, as we say. It's sort of beyond paper, but before sort of, broad distribution. So, we've teamed up with our U.S. partners to come up with, to hear ideas that we really think is just great, but it's still on paper. So we would actually, we're very, very strong in Japan. We know all the buyers in Japan. We have the talent. We're the largest independent production
They're actually the
company
mafia in Japan.
So So we've been able to basically take these ideas, sell it into Japan. We kind of do the proof of concept there, and then we actually think about what the show should look like internationally. We create an international format, like a pilot together, which is funded in Japan. And then, through a venue like this time, you versus America is a show that we work together. So, we would try to sell that around the world. So,
and I think what's important to realize is that what you're really tackling and what the great part of working with Aki and with the Japanese market, and I think Grant, you could agree to this, is that if you can crack an idea that can translate the Japanese market and the American market, it'll probably pretty much work anywhere. And I think that that's a really important part of it, is like, trying to find ideas that are relatable, that are translatable. It's like, the Japanese market has, for years as a distributor, been known as, it's impossible to enter. Right. They don't buy American programming, they don't buy American formats, so on and so forth. And in recent years, you've seen a little bit more of this sort of breaking through, but the way to break through is right. doing it like this, is doing it together, and then it sets up this incredible model for an international rollout, because, as I said, if it's worked in one, then it's probably going to work everywhere else as well.
Well, I was fortunate enough to host the pilot for You versus America, and I remember, and I got it, which was a trip, and as late as the day before we shot, the set was still pink, neon pink and green and yellow and blue and silver and everything, even though Notional kept telling them over and over again, no, steel and blue, that's it, steel and blue, that's all we want. Remember, the day before the show, you were still doing that. Could you have ever cracked that market without working with a local genius like Aki? I mean...
And that, I would say there's some things that are just impossible. I think it really is impossible without someone like Yoshimoto to crack the Japanese market, right?
Well, if I said it, it's...
No, it's true. We've been on, obviously through years, countless trips on pitch trips to Japan, and it's, you can have success obviously selling the scripted stuff, and they'll buy scripted American, scripted drama, and so on and so forth. But if you're trying to pitch a format, they're very reticent, and for the most part, primarily because, firstly, they have a very unique take on unscripted, and they make their own shows. And so their attitude is, we don't need yours.
I did a trip
Right,
to Japan with Aki the first time for a week, and the meetings were very much as follows. He introduced me. I said 5 words. I pitched the show in English to people who did not speak English. Then I sat in a room for about 3 hours while a bunch of Japanese businessmen yelled at each other in Japanese.
And smoked a lot.
And then I thought I did horribly. And it ended up being that we sold the show to Fuji, and we sold 2 shows on that trip, and it was amazing. Without him in the room.
Without playing the ukulele.
Yeah, I did not have my ukulele there, but it was a good trip.
You did bring your guitar for the
I did bring my
trip,
guitar.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's without a person like him or without that relationship, it is a market that is impossible to crack.
If you're say you're a producer from Chicago or whatever, and you have 1 or 2 credits, but you are not well known, and it's not a credit that's national, or nationally known. You're just a person with a great idea. Even if you have, is it to get to you all? Do you need someone else? Like, have you ever taken a pitch in the past from one of those speed pitch sessions or anything like that? Or if you're that person, where do you go to make the pitch more attractive to you?
Who are you talking to?
Everybody's looking at everybody here.
I mean, I think everything's all about packaging. I mean, I think that, whenever we look at any of our, when you look at any of our ideas, when you look at sort of, we have a show premiering in a couple months on NBC called Fashion Star, which is sort of the ultimate in packaging, where we have, Al McPherson's the host, Jessica Simpson, Nicole Richie, and John Barbados are the I guess you would call them the
Experts.
The experts. Thank you.
Oh, John Barbados is in the show?
In the show, exactly. And then your judges are the brands. So you have H&M, Macy's, and Saks.
The buyers of the brands,
they've become characters in the show, and they're the judges. So because they'll come on, there are these obviously fashion upstarts who want careers in fashion, and the beauty of the show is, there will be buyers from these various retailers who bid on the clothing if they think it's great, and literally the day after the show is on the air, you can buy that clothing in the store. And I think that is really the ultimate in packaging, when you're putting the different elements together. And as Grant was saying, as Aki was saying, it's all about making the package as irresistible as it can possibly be for your buyer.
And in that case, did you have the buyers, the hosts,
everything
the
was
name talent?
Yes. Well, we
production. The whole.
it was all put together in different layers, but it was all presented when it was presented to the network. That was how it was presented, and I think that as you go forward, and as Grant knows this really, really well, and as what we're all talking about too, is different ways to skin the cat and different ways to retain ownership, because you're looking at a world right now where you can be the producer from Chicago who can walk in and pitch an idea, but they're going to want to own everything, and even if it's successful, you're not going to make very much money. It's going to be a fee business. So if you're looking for ways to make your show valuable, and you're looking for ways to make looking for ways to own your IP, you need to figure out the stuff that we're talking about. You need to go and say, well, we've had it on in Japan and it's worked. Even if it's, it's in the phase, depending on what phase it's in, or we've got tape on it, or we've got advertisers paying for the fund production, so therefore we're going to own it because in fact the advertiser's paying for it. There are all of these different ways that you sort of, as producers, as entrepreneurs, as sort of creative packagers, that you're fighting vertical integration, and those are trying to sort of keep you down and trying to own things themselves. So I think that when you're pushing paper around the world, part of the reason you're doing it is that you're trying to sort of elevate above this sort of the normalcy of just selling into the networks where you just relinquish all rights. Right. The key is if you can push the paper and get it set up with Aki, or get it set up in Australia, or get it set up, in different parts around the globe.
We've evolved to a place where we're no longer pitching the U.S. networks first. We go around the world and pitch all the other networks first. And we look at it as an ego thing. We're friends with all the production companies in the States, And I don't, for lack of a better word, I don't give a shit about getting a credit on a network in the U.S., about my wife seeing it or my mom seeing it. I'd much rather have a show in 50 territories around the world that never makes air in the U.S. because I know that we actually retain the IP and we make money off it. Whereas when I sell shows to the networks in the U.S., it's a 10% production fee on the budget, and I'm grinding it out, and I'm going to work on that show 24 hours a day to make hardly any money at all.
Well, in fact, I almost wonder, just because the stakes are smaller and the egos are smaller in many smaller countries, is that actually kind of is it easier?
I don't think
To sell a foreign
I
market?
wouldn't say
It's
that the
not
egos
easier
are-
because you're
yeah.
not, you're also an outsider. There's different ways to skin the
Yeah.
cat where, I guess the most popular way is to partner with
Yeah, and I also don't
production
think you,
companies.
I also don't think you can say the egos are smaller in those
No.
territories. I mean,
They're not.
Egos are egos, and
Yeah.
people have egos wherever country you're going to
just
go.
in those
and-
territories legally, they just retain the IP. The networks don't.
Yeah,
They're
so
just not allowed to own
it's
it.
it's just a way of it's simply a way that you're trying to figure out how to own your content, and how to be the ones that, especially if you're dealing with the unscripted space. Traditionally, the studios just don't know how to monetize that content internationally. If you sell, Fashion Star, a perfect example, that is a show that we control the international on. We sell the format overseas, we sell the finished tape overseas. If we had packaged it a little bit differently, if we hadn't come in, we wouldn't have gotten that. And you know what? If you give that kind of a show to NBC to sell, look, they're amazing as a distribution platform here in the U.S. They're amazing as a distribution outfit internationally if you're talking about selling The Office. But when it comes to format sales, that's really their distribution team isn't set up to do that. They haven't built their businesses around that, which is where companies like Endemol and Fremantle and Electus and Shine and all these other companies, that's where we live and breathe. So. We're just trying to figure out ways to navigate the waters, so that we can own more.
So is that, you started to touch on this, I think, the big kahuna question is, where's the money? How do you make money doing this? Is ownership the key?
Yeah, I think,
Do you share any ownership with?
Yeah, no, of course. The network participates in the back end and absolutely, but you want to control. You want control, and you want the dollars flowing through to you. You know what I mean? Especially if you want to make sure that the money's coming through to you on the international, and that you're controlling the destiny of your content. Because that's the only way. Obviously, we're all working at companies that we're trying to build the value of that company to ultimately one day sell that company. And I've been involved in a couple of different scenarios where we've done that, and the ability to sell the company is based almost entirely upon what do you own, because the fees, as I said, Identity was on the air for 12 episodes on NBC. I think we did well over 200 in Italy. So that the ability, a show like Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader, which went off the network however long ago, is still on the air in different parts around the world. And same with The Moment of Truth, and same with The Biggest Loser. I mean, these are all shows that we've been involved with where the lifespan of a show is not just dependent upon how long it lasts here. If you control those, if you control those rights.
But that's your point, and it's a very good point, and you're saying it several times, the word control. And control is just as important, if not more important, than ownership to a certain extent. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I could own 5% of a format, but if I'm controlling the rights and I can make sure, like Chris does very, very well with all these different integrated models to make sure that he can maximize all the revenue streams, and making all these deals around the world, then he knows he's going to be happy. If he controls 100% of the format, but somebody else is doing this, then he might be disappointed. So it really is control, isn't it? And well, in the case of a lot of people where you're not going to be able to control your rights, you really need to partner with somebody that can. And
then going back, to the original thing, it's in order to partner with one of the gentlemen like yourself, you really need some part of that show, whether it is your tape or your artwork or some part of the idea. Like I've pitched you, Grant, how many, 10 times, and I can, or probably more than that at this point, 25, 30 shows, And you can just tell there's moments, 23 of those times, where you're just like, you're not turning me on in one way or another.
His
You
face
have
looks,
to have
his face
something.
his face looks just like that.
Yeah.
No, not like that. Not like that. No, like it was with the frown.
You really do need something for you to go, oh my God, I'm going to work. You know, so there has to be something about this where you decide, me and my entire team are going to work on doing a deal with you.
Well, with Grant, it's
We're
pretty
gonna
easy
work
because
on this
his
for-
pupils become dollar signs.
Right.
Like a
You
stop
see
sign,
the dollar
you just start
signs
to- and then he just tunes
Well,
out.
you know, you guys obviously have a long-standing relationship now, and you have delivered for Grant, and it's worked. So now he'll take your call, and you can walk in probably with less dog and pony than a newcomer, maybe. Am I wrong?
The idea
No?
is, I think it's the opposite. I think if we had pitched some of the best things we've ever pitched, like the first time, we might not have gotten your attention. But the fact that we went back, I mean, because I remember you saying like the third pitch, you were like, wow, you guys are very consistent, and the consistency of the ideas, and I think that is kind of...
Yeah, I think that the first two pitches were probably 3 o'clock in the morning, which didn't quite help me getting the structure in any case. But, you know, it's different horses for different courses. You know, I work for a company called Endemol, and we specialize in certain things. And we consider ourselves to be a creative company. So we have a lot of ideas and a lot of creators working all around the world, you know, coming up with ideas. I guess my role is to try and find an idea on the outside of the company that we don't have or we're not working on the inside. So you pitch me a show, you know, I may reject it, but that doesn't mean that I don't like it. It's just, it probably won't sit next to our show in our catalogue. You know, it doesn't at all mean that it can't be sold to somebody else. And of course, that happens. I've been pitched shows that I've, you know, declined because we're working on something similar, or we have a show that's very similar, and I won't buy a show that's similar to a brand. But yet that person has gone away and sold it to another, you know, to another company. And that's the way it goes.
We're pitching this show here, and I found myself today in like the third or fourth pitch saying, and in this game show, for the first time in the history of game shows, blah, 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 blah. And the third time I said it, the lady just started laughing at me. But I think the reason why we say that all the time is to just get people's attention. This idea has to be so original that you've never heard it before. And if I say the first time in the history of game shows, and you go, yeah, you're right, I've never heard that before, I know, okay, at least I've got your attention in that direction.
And if you look at your BlackBerry, then we know
He's looking at his
that it's not the
BlackBerry.
first time in the history of
Order
game
another-
shows.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, we've had that before, too, where we've said, well, for the first time in the history of blow, and then, you know, Phil Gurin will say, no, it's not. God bless you, but we did that pilot back in 84 or whatever. No, I was just picking a number, or 94. Phil's amazing.
Yeah, but like I said, you know, it's about knowing your client and knowing what they want. And, you know, if somebody comes up to me and sort of says, listen, we've got a great idea, you're going to take, you know, 15 guys and you're going to throw them to the house and we're going to film them. I sort of say, well, no thanks, we've got that. You know, it's called Big Brother. So there's no point us buying a show or spending money into development or production, piloting or whatever it is, for a brand that we all, you know, we try and nurture around the world. So once again, know your client.
Now, when you're sending your children these ideas, these brilliant things that you've labored and coned and crafted, and you're sending them all over the world to these far-flung markets, how concerned, or do you need to be concerned about, you know, intellectual property, legal issues, ownership,
Yeah, I mean, you've got
being stolen from?
Well, no, I mean, you have to. We always looked at it sort of, you know, that The Biggest Loser took so many different forms in so many different countries. You know, I mean, it was a studio-based sort of game show in Brazil, and it became a huge stripped hit in Australia, and so on and so forth. But the idea, you know, stayed the same and stayed true. But yes, of course, you know, I was always desperately afraid that someone was, because, you know, The Biggest Loser in the U.S., there's a lot of restrictions, and there's a lot goes into sort of making sure that no one's hurt on the set of that show for obvious reasons. And I was always worried that, you know, knock on wood, nothing ever happened. But yeah, that's always a level of concern. But, you know, I think you need to be, we look at it, and some companies are different, some companies are very strict in terms of, here is an absolute Bible, and if you don't follow this to an absolute T, we're going to sue you. I've always looked at it as like, hey, you know, I think that the chances of you knowing your market better than I do are pretty good. And because of that, we're going to rely on you, being the best you are in your given market, to make this show the best that it can possibly be. We're not going to obviously sell you Biggest Loser and then have you make a show about ice hockey, but it's you've got to have some flexibility behind it.
We're getting close to question time, but I didn't even realize that Biggest Loser came from Brazil. So they did.
No, it didn't come from
Oh,
Brazil.
I misunderstood.
We just sold it in Brazil.
But Chris is still going down to Brazil every week to make sure.
Well, I'd go to.
Chris sold it at a bar in Brazil one night. It ended up on television.
I'll find any excuse I can to go to Brazil. Works for me. We've got plenty more that we could talk about, but I wanted to extend the opportunity to you folks if anyone has any questions. And we have some folks doing the Phil Donahue thing over here with microphones. If you do, anything on your mind?
Oh boy.
Did I hear a question?
Behind you right there.
So what's the traffic, or what's the procedure the other way? Say I'm a producer from India and I want to co-produce with either one of your accomplished producers there. So how open is that, and how possible is it for a cross-cultural production?
Do you want to sell or produce our shows? Because we partner with, generally, me going into Spain or France or India or anywhere and trying to pitch a show directly to a network doesn't tend to work, because they don't know who the hell I am, and they're used to working with the producers they trust. So if you have relationships in India, what we do is a lot of the meetings that we have here are producers from territories. They come and hear our ideas, and then they license them from us, and then they go and they sell them to the networks directly.
And it has worked the other direction too, where we've acquired or partnered with production companies from the UK or from France, where they have a show that they've sold or they're just starting to sell, and we think it's so amazing that we say, hey, we're going to acquire it for 3 months to pitch it in the US.
Okay, we got to talk.
That does happen. And that's why, conferences like this, or Real Screen next week, or MIP, really, MIP is the big one.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, international companies partnering with each other.
Yeah. And when you partner with people like Endemol, they have production companies set up all over the world already. So you go to the distributor directly, they give it to one of their trusted production companies, as well as Shine, and as well as Electus is now doing that.
Yeah, I think we had a little word earlier today, didn't we? And it was a sort of an advice that I gave you. Is, we do have a production company in India, and you're best to go and see that production company, our production company there, and pitch them, and then see what they say, and if there's some sort of deal to be made there, and perhaps that's one way of getting your foot in the door.
Anyone else? Questions?
How you doing? So I recently developed a series and shot the pilot on spec. Have a 5-minute sizzle reel, pitch
It was
reel.
obviously a dangerous pilot.
Clearly. Yep. This was in production.
Does it involve alligators?
Yeah, there were, and Bigfoot was in there too. So, but for example, if I bring this to gentlemen like you, are you guys going to evaluate and say, okay, that's something that either works with our brand, doesn't work with our brand, or is it just like you've already developed it too far, it's not for us?
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah.
My job is to watch everything and take every single pitch, and I'm an asshole. I know that I can sell it or I cannot sell it. I know what networks want and what they don't want, so I will give you the most honest
It goes back
answer.
to, what I don't understand is it goes back to what Mr. Grant Ross was just saying, and you've said it a couple times, is know your buyer. So if you have a pilot, if you have a pilot that you just shot and worked really hard on, and it's about, extreme sports, because it's dangerous and you broke your arm. If it's about extreme sports, I would go, and the types of shows that are on the air that are in that same genre, who produces them, what is the company, just do some homework. What's amazing to me is when people come and pitch us and they give us something that's wildly nothing that we've ever done before, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, you've just wasted your time, you got in touch with us, you came to New York, whatever, we set up this meeting and whatever, and now I'm watching the show, and it literally has nothing to do with anything we've ever done.
And it doesn't. It's not that it's poorly produced or anything. It's just that it's not in the space.
It's also
Exactly.
people tend to think for some some reason, because there is some fun associated with show business, that there isn't work that's required to be done.
Exactly.
And you know, while there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of work in relationships and understanding the markets, and especially when you're dealing on a global scale, understanding all of the various markets and all of the various buyers, and that is really that's three-quarters of the battle.
It's so easy now just to sit back, look at the TV guide, or look at the scroll on the TV and figure out what networks would that be on. Now, look at that network and DVR, the 5 or 6 biggest shows. Fast forward to the end. Who are the production companies? Who are the names that you see? Those are the places that you want to go. If it's got some sort of game element, or it's got some sort of international distribution flavor to it, then come to us definitely. Or cooking, obviously, we get those all the time. But if that's the easy way to do it. And that's just a little bit of homework that you can do that'll make your search so much easier. And it's kind of flattering to get the phone call if you're that company and you say, look, I looked and I know that you do this show and this show and this show, and that's why I'm coming to you. Then it's like, oh, they have done the homework. This meeting makes more sense.
And aside from having done your homework, I think both Chris and Dave are alluding to something that you've already demonstrated, which is passion and energy and commitment and the work that it takes to get something done. If they're going to end up modifying your idea a little bit, so be it. I'm sure that happens with almost all shows. The original version of Chopped was hosted in a mansion by a butler holding a chihuahua. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. And every time a person was
awful.
It was hilarious.
It was awful.
I wasn't involved. Every time a person was chopped, they fed the dish to the dog.
The dog ate the food.
Seriously.
Which was awesome.
Which is awesome.
Linda's not in the audience. Linda Lee's not in the audience.
Oh no, wait, am I not supposed to talk about
That
that?
wasn't Linda's fault.
It was awesome, but
It was
but,
an executive who really wanted that.
Yeah.
but Food Network got
It was
involved,
no
and
longer
they decided they didn't. Well, that was a little too zany for Food Network, but there was something in there that the clean, simple competition that they liked, and it worked.
Don't mistake passion though, say 3 of these conferences ago, I had this meeting with this woman who was extremely passionate and had shot multiple episodes of this educational kids show. And it was a great show, and I have kids, I have a 4-year-old, she would have loved the show, but I had to say to her, look, I don't even know where to start. And she was trying to talk me into, oh no, this is a great avenue for your company to go in. And I was just like, there's a board and all these people, you're crazy, stop. And she did have a lot of passion, but I had to literally remove her from the building.
Well, passionate people can be super annoying too.
Exactly.
You got to tamp that down a little bit. I'm sorry, I believe you also had a question?
Hey there. You just set me up perfectly. I actually do
I have an
kids
education
programming.
degree.
Are you going to be annoying?
You escorted from the building the last
I'm
time
only
we met.
slightly crazy.
Security?
But I'm interested in your perspective on the game and how the nuances may change when you're talking about kids programming versus programming for a general audience.
Yeah, I'm not really specialist in kids programs, so I'm probably the worst.
It's such a different, and I think that I looked at getting into that business so many times, and it relies so heavily on the merchandising and the ancillary side of the business that most often the television projects are simply vehicles to drive merchandising. And be that as it may, it's a completely, to Dave's point, it's a totally, they even have, like Dave was talking about MIP, they even have a completely different conference for MIP Junior. It's a totally different business. It requires a tremendous amount of time, effort to get into it, investment, and I think to our point, understanding your core competency, understanding what you're really good at, and then delivering on that is what we're all, every day, we wake with that need to do that. And I don't think any one of us on the stage wakes up in the morning and was like, oh, by the way, I've got tons of time today to just break into the kids' program. So it's sort of like, I think...
And it is almost a different language. There was a project we had with a guy that lives in our town that we live in. And he has this company that I won't name, but they're great, and they do all these kids programming. And we just tried to do a show with them that seemed like it crossed the streams. It was kind of reality and then half based on the kids. And what we found was that the language that we spoke, I had 2 meetings and then just said, look, this is never going to work, and they've kind of felt the same thing. The language was totally different. So there's an example of they're great guys, and they're really talented, and they know their business, but it's very different from what we do.
People talk to Food Network all the time about kids programming. They've tried it. The kids didn't watch it. The kids want to watch the same shows.
Kids want to watch.
What's going global? MasterChef in France. MasterChef is great all over the world, but in France, MasterChef Kids does as good as the actual adult version of the show. Which, if you go to Food Network here, they're like, no one wants to watch kids cook. No one gives a shit about kids cooking. So.
Well, and it's also dangerous. Knives.
We're out of time.
Well, we are 18 seconds over, so I think we're going to have to give ourselves the hook.
Thank you.
If you have time, swing by the Notional Yacht tonight at 6 for cocktails.
Sure.
We're letting a lot of people on.
Or don't.
Or come by.
That was the most insane thing I've ever seen anyone do at a concert.
And
Just wait till 6:30. Yeah.
it ends at 6:15. So, and thank you all very much for coming. Cheers.